Hello everyone and welcome back to another installment of the Warwick F1 Show, and it is breaking news of the world of F1 because finally, after a whole lot of effort which has been going on for years, we finally have an 11th team joining us on the grid for the start of the 2026 season in the form of Cadillac. Now, we know the initial bid by Andretti Global was rejected. That was also originally backed by Cadillac, but finally, after a stronger bid, including General Motors, they have got a deal accepted. And so we thought we'd have to make an episode on this subject just to discuss what our thoughts are on this. Getting excited now, even more so for 2026 with the introduction of this new team. I'm your host, Callum J. Hodge, and I'm joined once again by our Society President Katch, our Society President Chinmay, and also a new guest for this episode, Oran. Thank you all very much for joining me today. So I'm going to first off hand over to Chinmay, as he is going to give us a brief little rundown of this entire situation, because really it's been going on for quite a few years now with the bid from Andretti and now this combined venture with Cadillac and General Motors, and finally it's come through. So I'm going to, Chinmay, if I hand over to you, what has been going on over the past few years? I appreciate I'm giving you like 2 minutes to sum up over like probably 6 or 7 years worth of history, but you got this, I suppose?
Yeah, no, I'll do as quick as and as best as I can. So effectively this all started with the idea of General Motors wanting to, and Andretti themselves, who are very successful in the IndyCar. Those of you if you're watching this and don't know, this is a company owned by the famous Mario Andretti, currently run by his son Michael. At the time when they first made their proposal to join, was set up by Mario's son Michael Andretti to kind of make their own team in Formula One and kind of just make another American outfit and that sort of stuff. And initially they actually collaborated with General Motors and specifically the Cadillac branch of the brand. So yeah, they basically came together. They proposed, we want to be an extra team in 2026 with the new regs. And F1, most of the teams pretty much rejected it. And yeah, and the idea was that GM was going to make their own engines, make their own team, do that sort of stuff. But yeah, and it was and they basically did all this effort as well to kind of just convince F1 that it wasn't just a glorified sponsorship, but an actual work scheme with Andretti. But yeah, and I guess what happened was recently F1 has recently accepted the 11 team eventually, but without the Andretti name. As soon as Michael Andretti stepped down a few months ago, Cadillac has been able to effectively be accepted to make their own works team as an official 11th team on the grid from 2026. But the slight caveat is they're not going to meet engines straight away. The engines are expected to be starting in 2028. So at least for the first 2 years, we're expecting to be a customer team where they're developing the F1 version with conjunction with Dallara, I believe. But kind of like similar to what they do in IndyCar with like Chip Ganassi Racing, and they do the collaboration, that sort of stuff. But yeah, effectively what it was, Andretti and Cadillac allied together to start a grid. Everyone said no. Andretti basically got dropped, and F1 said yes. But yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. I guess that if that's helpful.
No, absolutely. That sounds brilliant. So as we can clearly tell, it's been a long time in the making. And I think first of all we'll get everyone's thoughts on it. Oran, if you don't mind, we're gonna come to you first. Just what are your thoughts on this 11th team on the grid? Because we haven't had more than 10 teams. We've had the 10 current teams, I suppose, with different versions of the names since 2016, where we had 11 teams with the MRT Mercedes as well. And how do you think this is going to impact the racing? Do we think that this is going to be make the races better and more entertaining with having these higher teams or high numbers of teams, or do we think that it's just not worth it with the current midfield teams that we have, and especially the points margins that we have as well?
I mean, I think if you look back a few years ago, like the 2017 and 2018, you had like a definitive top three teams. So you only had like a few fighting for the final couple of points. But now you see like Haas, Alpine, V-Carb, they're all in the mix for the bottom couple of points, and that makes it really exciting. Then you throw another team in there, and that makes that even more exciting. And of course, if you think of GM and Andretti, they have a lot of money behind them. So you can see them potentially in the next maybe 4 years when they get that engine behind them, potentially challenging the likes of Mercedes for a world championship. So I think it'll be interesting to see them develop in Formula One. And I think it'd be quite interesting to see the drivers they go for as well.
Yes, there's certainly a lot of points to unpack there, which we'll get into on this episode. Some new driver places coming up, and what Andretti and Cadillac are actually capable of. Katch, are you on the same sort of lines here, that this is a positive benefit for F1 and the future that it's trying to build?
I definitely think so. It'll be so exciting having 22 cars back on the grid. We've had so many discussions throughout the podcast, and just as F1 fans, about how there's so many drivers that are missing out on seats that really deserve to have seats. So it's exciting that it's going to be as soon as 26. I think as soon as the Andretti grid was rejected, we all thought, right, it'll be 28 as soon as we get an F1 team, an 11th team back on the grid. But to see a team come on so soon will be so exciting for the sport, financially, for the fans, for the companies, just for everyone. I think what's really interesting, and I read somewhere that this Andretti / Cadillac / GM outfit, in whatever form, because they're technically not an F1 team, they've been using Toyota's wind tunnel in Germany to do 26 testing already. So they're actually ahead of the game compared to all the other F1 teams.
They actually have more time to develop than actual F1 teams. Is this
They
what
do,
you're saying?
so it's not. I think what's exciting for me is that they're not going to come onto the grid in 26 like completely underprepared. They're using Andretti Silverstone facilities that they've been building up for years in anticipation to join the grid. They've already been doing some 26 testing and all of that. They're going to come fighting. I don't think they're a backmarker team when they join the grid anymore.
Thing is, what you said, Katch, is sort of correct, but the problem is the Andretti side has been almost completely dropped. So I don't know. So I assume that Cadillac or GM are going to take majority of what Andretti have actually done. But the problem is for Andretti is that majority of the testing that's already been done was under the Andretti brand itself. But Michael Andretti has been, and pretty much the Andretti Global side of things has been pretty much completely booted from this new proposal. So I guess yes,
and there's no way that they can. There's no way that they can get that data that Andretti spent all that time on over to this team, especially as Andretti seem to be working with Cadillac for.
Well, but
Mario the most part of this proposal.
Mario Andretti is still going to be on the board of directors for this team. Andretti is still involved in this team, just not officially, not under like the official name, because the FIA doesn't like the name Andretti. So I think they're being sneaky about it.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens, because I think, as we know, it's still a proposal and there's still a lot of details to be sorted out with the FIA and in General Motors and Cadillac, as we know. But we touched on it there and Cadillac might be ahead of the game now with their testing, and also Oran picked up on this with maybe seeing them of what progress we can see of them jumping up the grid. And I wanted to get everyone's opinion on what do we think Cadillac are actually capable of, because I know certainly for me, I've mentioned time and again that we've seen so many examples of big names come into the sport. The one I always lead back to is Toyota, where they have lots of money, lots of financial backing, lots of facilities, and it doesn't work out for them. And we know how harsh this sport can be. Chinmay, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think that Cadillac are capable of, and what should be their reasonable achievements to be made in the next 5-10 years or so for a new team that's coming into F1?
The thing is, obviously Cadillac are massive. I mean, they got the backing of, one of America's big three with General Motors. So obviously, this is going to be like this will be almost an Audi level investment level. But, and I assume that the advantage is that they probably are going to start off with a customer engine. So probably, whether it's Mercedes, Ferrari, Honda, even on the off case, actually, I doubt the Red Bull engine, but there's maybe on this engine. So compared to somebody like Audi, who are going to be literally going from, they're going to be starting in the sport with their own engine, which is a massive risk. Obviously, we know the last time a new engine maker came into the sport, when Honda re-entered back in 2015, we know how disastrous that went. And obviously, Honda are one of the most respected car makers in the world. Japan, and obviously you got the stereotype Japanese reliability and stuff. But yeah, I guess having the custom engine is going to be a good start. And obviously, like Katch said, they are going to have that slight head start because obviously, yeah, like you said, Mario Andretti is going to be on the board of directors, and I assume they are going to take some IP from Andretti's work. But the level that they have to do in such a short amount of time, they're probably going to have to, from what I've been reading as well, they're probably going to have to triple their operations in the space of a year, more or less than that, really. And so it's going to be difficult, but as long as they don't end up, from the start being right at the back, like I don't know, like how Caterham and HRT, or even how Toyota was back in the mid 2000s. They're pumping all this money in, and they don't end up like that, and they can at least somehow contend for points on regular occasions. So maybe, I don't know, target the lower midfield at the very least, then maybe they can stand a chance. But then again, an 11th team, there's only 10 places that give points. It's going to be even more difficult to grab those points, and especially with teams, which with already the established infrastructure, it's going to be an uphill battle to begin with.
It's certainly going to be something that's needing to follow their progression over a number of years, because I think it could certainly be a case I can see, especially if they have all of this financial backing and all this preparation that they've put in, that maybe in the first season they do really well, but then it's a case of actually following that up with consistency and being able to follow that train of development for many years. Oran, I wanted to come and get your opinion on this, because I believe in the last bit that you said that you said that they could be up fighting in the top four within, what was it, 5-10 years? Am I hearing that correctly, or was that you just using an analogy? What do you think that Cadillac is capable of in the next 5 to 10 years or so?
Personally, I think Cadillac's here for the long run, so I could see them, especially in the future, getting there. But as we've seen in the past, no matter how much money or how much testing you do before you enter Formula One, it's just such a big step that you're always going to get shocked. For example, Toyota spent an entire year testing their Formula One car and were still backmarkers. And we've even seen it with Audi currently. They completely underestimated how hard an F1 project is. So I doubt that Andretti are going to be consistent points challengers in their first year and probably going to be a bottom 3 team. But I believe that they're here for the long run. So they're going to put the money in, they're going to make it work, make the right, they're going to hire the right people to progress the team forwards. So I can definitely see them, especially with that engine, when they finally get their own engine up to the standards of like Ferrari and Mercedes, they will be able to challenge for wins and championships.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would certainly like to see one of the, because now we have 2 teams that are starting up from scratch. All right, yes, it's Sauber, it's Audi taking over the Sauber team, but it's two new brands that are coming into F1 in 2026, and it'd be very interesting, I think, to follow their progression. And I would love to see a team be able to do that, go from the back and essentially progress themselves consistently throughout the years to try and battle and break up what I suppose we've seen as the general top 3 or top 4 over F1 history, really, with Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, and McLaren. Recent history, I mean, obviously, with Red Bull as well. So we're now going to move it on to something that was brought up recently in a separate point, that Cadillac joining as an 11th team on the grid now brings up 2 new spots on the F1 grid for 2026. Something that's brilliant, because we, as Katch mentioned, we do find time and again that the spots are very competitive, and we do love to see more and more drivers who are ultimately some of the best drivers in the world and see what they're capable of battling together in F1. Can we start to skepticize of who they might exactly bring in? Yeah, Oran, I'm gonna come to you because I think you had some points that you wanted to bring up on this section. Do we think we can kind of think who is going to be the drivers for this team in 2026?
I think you can start to think about what drivers they could go for because, as you've already mentioned, Andretti compete in IndyCar, and the IndyCar equivalent to Formula 2 is NXT. So we could potentially see some Andretti rookies from NXT get promoted. So potentially Jamie Chadwick is an Andretti NXT driver. And I think it'd be very exciting to have Jamie Chadwick on the Formula 1 grid because I've heard Michael Andretti talk about it a lot. And I know that he's sort of taken a step back. But I think it'd be great publicity and great for sponsorship to have GM sign Jamie Chadwick because, I don't think he's the first woman to race F1, but the first woman in a long time. And I could also potentially see maybe them leading down the path of Pato O'Ward because we hear him getting spoken a lot about with a potential F1 seat. And since they are going to try and make themselves the American F1 team, why not lead it with probably the most spoken about American driver?
Yeah, absolutely. I think IndyCar is definitely a solid shout of some drivers that I think would be an interesting shout. Do we think that the IndyCar is going to be a reliable place to get drivers from? Essentially, we know that obviously IndyCar is a highly reputable sport around the world, but F1 is certainly something that's very different in many aspects. And if we do think that IndyCar drivers might have the chance of coming over, first off, do we think they'll be any good and be able to stand up to the challenge?
I 100% think so. I've been raving about IndyCar drivers for so long. They've not got their fair share of a chance. Remember people like Jacques Villeneuve? He came from IndyCar. He did incredible in F1. Andretti as well. Why is there any reason that we're doubting the stature of IndyCar drivers? Alex Palou has just won 3 titles. He is so incredible and deserves to be, as much as bringing an IndyCar driver over to F1, improves the stature of IndyCar and the reputation of IndyCar within the FIA, within the global motorsport scene, but it also is helpful for those teams bringing the American side over. Like Oran mentioned, obviously Pato O'Ward is an incredible shout. He has testing with McLaren's F1 car. He is the current reserve driver for McLaren. I think it's more unlikely I would see him as an outside option because, especially with McLaren having recently released Bortoletto, I doubt they'd want to release O'Ward, especially if he's still going to be under contract for Arrow McLaren. Colton Herter is another shout. Alex Palou, like I said, both of them have history with F1 machinery. May have also been, I know, like Felix Rosenquist, for example, he is another IndyCar driver. He used to be racing in F3, F2. Him and O'Ward were part of the Red Bull Junior team. These drivers over in America, they have the chance now with an Andretti Cadillac team to bring so much experience and exposure. And I think a lot of people that just follow F1 maybe don't realise the standards that IndyCar drivers have. I'm not saying that bringing it, for example, a Herter or a Palou, they're not the next Max Verstappen. I'm not saying that at all. They're not the next Lewis Hamilton. But they're on the level of some of the current F1 drivers. I completely believe that. And I think this is such a perfect opportunity to raise the standard of IndyCar and to bring it onto the main stage again.
Do you think that as well, just to advance on that point, we mentioned about the drivers and how they'd be able to take advantage of the situation, but also Cadillac in general. Do you think that this is maybe not only Cadillac will be able to build on this experience from IndyCar and bring it over to F1, but also building the experience of IndyCar and improving the quality of IndyCar teams? Do we think that will work both ways, or maybe at least help out Cadillac with this new venture in a way because they have experience in other motorsports?
I think it will. I think it's obviously going to be twofold. Obviously, it will help the F1 side and bringing those drivers over, but for Cadillac, they get so much experience. Though I think it will be likely, if we're going back to the point on who do we think Cadillac will bring in as their drivers, I think the most likely scenario is, like Audi have done, an established F1 driver, like Valtteri Bottas, for example. we could see him back in 26. I could see him doing 1 year as a reserve Mercedes driver and then come back. Like, Hulkenberg's now going to be the experienced Audi driver. Bottas could be the experienced Cadillac driver. That's not a bad shout.
I think we'd all like to see Bottas back on the grid. Personally, I think he definitely doesn't feel like he's completely finished in the sport, and this maybe does provide him with a route back into it. And it'll be very interesting to see these two very experienced drivers, Bottas and Hulkenberg, leading these new teams and seeing what they're capable of. The final point that I just want to go on to is the point scoring system, because something I thought about, and I remember when we went back and watched the Brazil 2012 Grand Prix. When with the F1 Society, and when we had 24 drivers, 12 teams on the grid, and you ended up with having basically lots of drivers at the end of the season scoring nothing, because we still had this same point system that we have currently, where it's only the top 10 drivers who get points. And so, Chinmay, if I come to you first, do we think that the current point system needs to change with the introduction of Cadillac? Because we're already finding it, the current midfield teams like Haas, like Alpine, like RB, they're already finding it very difficult to scrap for these final points on the grid, especially now we have 4 teams right at the front consistently. And now it's going to be made even harder with an introduction of another 2 drivers who are likely also going to be fighting around that midfield area. So do you think it could benefit to see the points tally go down to something like 12th place? Or is that just something that we're going to have to deal with ultimately?
I guess, I mean, obviously for now, F1 are not going to change anything. They're going to see what happens, but you know, never say never. You know, we could have another points overhaul, and yeah, and I guess with the main problem being is that, especially for the lower teams, it's quite difficult to distinguish a lot between the two. And a lot of, especially the lower constructors, a lot of it these days is not only to do with just car performance on singular racetracks, but a lot of it can be to do with just luck in general. I mean, or just complete spikes. I mean, you know, look at Alpine this season. I mean, we've just seen them go from a double podium to
They have skyrocketed 3 places off of one weekend, and yeah, you're right. That's probably because of how competitive it's been.
Yeah, I guess it's another thing we could bring from IndyCar is the point system, because I do like the IndyCar point system, because every place gets somewhat awarded.
That would be chaos. It would be so funny. I
Okay,
guess
to remind our audience and also me as well, because I don't watch IndyCar. What is the IndyCar point system?
I'll give this a catch.
Points. Too many points. So everyone that finishes a race, because IndyCar as well, it has road courses and oval races. Their races are usually double the length of F1 races, which we obviously wouldn't take that bit over. But yeah, everyone who finishes a race gets a point. Pole gets a point. Every lap that a driver leads, you get a point per lap. The driver with the most laps led gets 2 extra points. And then it starts off with first position gets 50 points. And then it goes 40, and then 35, 32, 30, 28.
This seems so foreign from an F1
place. 10th place gets 20 points.
And then presumably it goes on down to all. Yeah, so it goes on down to all of the drivers.
Yes, it just goes down one by one, and then
Maybe
it's a bit too many points. I
don't think that we should go full IndyCar, because that is quite chaotic, and I think a bit too it's just a bit too overly complex in my mind.
I mean, some of the rules in F1 are already a bit too much for people to comprehend. Sometimes it's like sometimes with the the whole with the rain, for example, if a race finishes midway, and then trying to calculate how many points people get. That can be overcomplicated for
F1 I think is already quite not great sometimes on explaining some of the rules to a newer audience.
Everyone was trying to calculate what Lando needed to do to win the championship against Max. Imagine if
we were confused on we were confused on this as well.
I've had the 15,000 different possibilities of just
we have to provide some sympathy to all of the people running the social media accounts of F1 who need to calculate this stuff to put on their latest Instagram post for when the championships get interesting. So I think maybe, yes, we won't go as far as IndyCar, but I think it would maybe benefit a little bit to see some shift in the points tally just to reward a little bit more for the lower down teams, because, man, Hulkenberg needs some more points. He's got an 11th far too many times in this season, and we need to just give a bit of I think, credit for that, especially with how, like I said, with the eight drivers being, well, 7 drivers, let's just say, always being up there consistently in those top positions, and it being very difficult for those lower down teams. But I think we've covered a great deal of what this new Cadillac venture in F1 in 2026 could mean. Do we have any final thoughts before we round out the episode of thoughts on Cadillac coming into the sport in 2026?
I did want to mention, I think we briefly touched on it in Chinmay's introduction, but a lot of the hesitancy from the other teams of not accepting Andretti was financial, and one thing that Cadillac GM are doing is, because of the dilution of the prize pot, obviously, with the 11th team coming in, they're going to be paying in an additional $450 million, which is crazy. That's an insane amount of money just to be on a quote-unquote anti-dilution fund.
They must be fairly confident in this venture if that's the money they're wanting to pay to get into the sport.
Yeah, and that's the normal fee of coming in.
I'm glad they've done that, though, because when you explained this to me, it did seem impossible in a way that a new team would ever be able to join F1 if we had, because no team is ever going to want to receive less money. That's not something that's going to happen. So I'm glad it's happened this way to allow us to have an 11th team on the grid, and I think certainly that would be and I'm glad it's come about as a result with this. Even if they're wanting to pay that insanely huge amount of money, hopefully that their venture is actually going to be successful as a result from paying that sort of money. But we'll have to obviously see how that gets on in 2026. We've got far more pressing concerns to worry about at the moment, mainly that we have the penultimate race of the season, Qatar, upcoming, so we'll have a preview for that in the next couple of days before we get into practice and the weekend coming up. And then we'll also have a Las Vegas review for that early morning race that we have just covered as well, coming away very, very soon. But until then, thank you very much, Katch, Chinmay and Oran for joining me. I have been your host, Callum, and until next time, goodbye.